administration currently running concentration camps at the border. Somewhat remarkably, this is a debate we are now having in the year 2019, as the administration builds out day by day a sprawling and ever-expanding system of irregular detention for desperate migrants who the president rails against and vilifies at every turn. Of course, many of the president's apologists have attempted to turn this urgent humanitarian and moral crisis into a debate over what freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called them.
The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border, and that is exactly what they are. They are concentration camps.
Those comments had set off a firestorm of both good faith and bad faith criticism, and there are legitimate reasons to object to the use of that term in the context. As many pointed out, direct allusions to invocations of the horror of the Holocaust are always treacherous territory. The term concentration camp, though it predates the Nazi regime and applies to many camps operated throughout the world throughout history, is, in the public imagination in the U.S., intimately tied to the machinery of death that the Nazis constructed. Analogies to the Nazis always run the danger of cheapening the sheer scope of the horror of the Holocaust. What we confront right now in the U.S. is not genocide or mass murder. In fact, the discomforting truth is that, in fact, an expansion of a set of systems already workshopped by the last Democratic president. But good faith objections aside, there was also swift, massive efforts made to turn Cortez's comments into their own controversy by people who have shown absolutely no concern whatsoever over the conditions for the human beings inside those camps themselves, or the fact that at least 7 children are known to have died in immigration custody since last year. These are 3 of those children: 8-year-old Felipe Gomez Alonso, 16-year-old Carlos Gregorio Hernandez Vasquez. They were both suffering from the flu when they died in CBP custody. CBP says 7-year-old Jacqueline Kahl Makin died from an infection that shut down her vital organs. According to her family, she was well fed and in good health when she arrived at the border with her father. Now, before these deaths of those children, no child had died in CBP custody for nearly a decade. Something is wildly, horribly wrong. Children are dying in our care and custody, yet so many of those in high dudgeon over the words of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have shown absolutely zero concerns about the deaths of these children, zero concern about the administration ripping literally thousands of children, even infants, from their parents' arms, zero concern about the U.S. currently accepting fewer refugees fleeing war and oppression than any administration in recent U.S. history.
I think Congresswoman AOC needs to apologize, not only to the nation, but to the world.
This type of rhetoric from our elected leaders is irresponsible, reckless, misinformed, and wrong.
We've had a long history, if you go back, at people who really are left-wing zealots, ignoring history, ignoring facts to pursue their causes. At some point, you just sort of run out of ways to describe how ignorant this is.
Ah, yes, the rhetoric, the ignorance. Instead of an honest reckoning with this administration's policies, professional legacy cases like Donald Trump Jr. and Liz Cheney, along with the other opportunists in their party, try to score a cheap rhetorical point in bad faith, something we should note they are well practiced at and something that will only intensify as we march towards the election. But no amount of debased and craven news cycle trolling can adequately obscure the moral stakes here. The President of the United States was greeted for his kickoff rally for his campaign yesterday by white supremacist supporters flashing white power signs. One reporter quoted a disillusioned GOP operative who said the Trump campaign is well aware of the organized participation of Proud Boy rallies merging into Trump events. They don't care. And we know how the president feels about gatherings of avowed Nazis and white supremacists, like the ones who marched in Charlottesville.
You had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
It's the same president who uses all the darkest rhetoric of authoritarian nationalism to rail against the shadowy forces of internal enemies. He accuses immigrants of infesting the country like vermin, the way that, yes, Nazis talked about Jews and others. This rhetoric has been made into policy on the ground, where right now, under our noses, a vast system of irregular and unjust detention is being constructed that will be very, very difficult to unbuild, where migrants are held in what DHS's own Inspector General describes as egregious conditions. Today, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted in response to the performative outrage over her comments, quote, DHS ripped thousands of their children from their parents and put them in cages with inhumane conditions. They call their cells dog pounds and freezers. I will never apologize for calling these camps what they are. If that makes you uncomfortable, fight the camps, not the nomenclature. I'm joined now by MSNBC contributor Michelle Goldberg, columnist for the New York Times, and Charlie Pierce, writer-at-large for Esquire. I guess at some level, the silver lining here is that we're talking about the massive, expanding, sprawling system of regular detention that is being erected under everybody's noses.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the only silver lining to this kind of deeply asinine debate. And I think, like you said, I think that there is an argument to be had whether the term concentration camp, although we use it in a host of other contexts, people use it regularly to talk about the Uyghur camps in China. It was used to talk about the Japanese internment camps, which are now being repositioned to hold some of these migrants. But there is an argument that, this is so connected in people's minds to Nazi death camps that people think you're comparing Border Patrol to Nazis, and it's not a useful rhetorical technique, and that we should find another way to talk about these camps where we are concentrating ethnic outgroups in deplorable conditions. Fine. But there is something...
But that's the reality. We're concentrating groups that are being vilified by the president, who have extremely little power, who are showing up at the border, who are migrants, who are talked about as infesting vermin by the president of the United States in conditions that our own government has called egregious.
And there's also... There is, I feel like we're always charting new frontiers of indignity with this administration or with this media climate, but there is something so grotesque about seeing apologists for a white nationalist president who openly traffics in fascist tropes, then wrapping themselves in this kind of unctuous philo-Semitism and using it to lecture, in many cases, Jews. I mean, it's bad enough that white nationalists are back. There is the idea that white nationalists are going to lecture Jews about the memory of the Holocaust, I mean, it is grotesque.
And Charlie, to me, this is also just, this is a small taste of what is to come, right? The sort of, we call it in the office sometimes a flop, right? Like in soccer or basketball, right? The sort of performative taking of umbrage that you see all the time, but in this case, we're seeing it from someone like Don Jr. or Liz Cheney. That will intensify, and it will be a real test as we head towards the election.
Oh, there's no question. And to get my own 2 cents on the whole semantic debate, George Takei tweeted out this afternoon, hey, I was in two of those things that were concentration camps. These are concentration camps. I think George Takei is dispositive on the subject. That being said, we are coming into a dark ages, broadswords and, mace and leather apron bloodfest of a campaign. I mean, it is going to be, and I will become Kreskin on this right now. It's going to be the worst campaign in American history, by far. It's going to be worse than any of those ones in the 1850s where people got called hermaphrodites.
It's going to be bad. And to the point that you were saying about the sort of fascist tropes, I mean, we had someone arrested yesterday for assaulting a reporter at that event. We had, again, there were white nationalists who showed up to flash white power symbols.
Right. And no one's even shocked anymore. I mean, this
exactly.
is just now, this is something that we've all become desensitized to.
Well, what's remarkable is like that happened yesterday. Mm-hmm. And that is not the driving controversy of the day.
Right. The driving
pertaining to the specter of fascism that may haunt the year of 2019. It is not the people who are showing up to battle, they say, Antifa or whatever in the streets. No, it's what words that AOC used.
Right. It's not a president whose chief propagandist, Steve Bannon, openly calls himself a disciple of Leni Riefenstahl, who was Hitler's propagandist. I mean, you have... I know it seems like ancient history, but it's only a couple of years ago that he had an advisor, Seb Gorka, who was a lifetime member of a Nazi-aligned Hungarian group. And now you have Gorka out there criticizing other people for anti-Semitism. I mean, we are so far through the looking glass. And the thing that really kind of sends me deeper into despair is that on the one hand, you have people who are they're working in obvious bad faith. They're just trolling. None of these people were outraged when someone on the Trump National Security Council compared carbon dioxide, the demonization of carbon dioxide, to the demonization of Jews in the Holocaust.
And that person has been chosen by the president.
Right, but you also have, I think kind of good faith, both sides, mainstream reporters who are reporting this as if this is a, kind of legitimate national controversy instead of a ridiculous sideshow.
Well, and that, to me, Charlie, that's the point here is if you're going to report about the controversy, which it is news, we're doing it here, it's like it's a controversy about what actually the conditions in the camps are.
Right, and you've been there, Chris, and I haven't, and but everybody I've ever talked to who's been there has said that this policy is a stench in the nostrils of the world. And just, as an illustration of where we are, was there ever a more pathetic empty suit or pair of empty suits than Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio at that rally last night? In 2012, when he spoke to the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Marco Rubio was going to be the Republican Barack Obama. He was going to be the guy who lifted the Republican Party up, and his issue was going to be comprehensive and relatively humane and bipartisan immigration reform. And now, 7 years later, he's sitting in the audience.
That's right.
His head bobbing like one of those banjo-playing bears at Chuck E. Cheese, watching a madman rant at the podium. It's an astonishing, if I believed in dementors or vampires, I would say that the souls have just been sucked out of these people.
Yeah, and he was very touchy on Twitter about his attendance there. Charlie Pierce and Michelle Goldberg, great to have you. For more on the reality on the ground for migrants in Trump's America, I'm joined by Gelernt. He's the deputy director of ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project. Okay, this is the data we have. ICE is detaining more than 53,500 immigrants in jails across the country, which is a new record. That number has jumped by nearly 700 in less than a week. Since late last year, ICE has detained nearly 10,000 more immigrants. What is going on with immigrant detention right now?
Yeah, it's completely unnecessary. Are there some immigrants who need to be detained? Of course, but what's happening is there's no individualized assessment, so they're detaining everyone, not just people who are flight risk or danger. We've always said after a hearing, if they're determined to be a flight risk or a danger, then maybe you got to detain them. But right now, they're just wholesale detaining mothers, fathers, children. It's out of control. There are plenty of ways to ensure appearance, and asylum seekers in particular want to be at their hearings because they don't want to live in limbo. They want to have a permanent status, and they will show up. And at the end of the Obama administration, there was a case management system that was developed that ensured appearance at practically 97% rate.
We should say, and I want to sort of present the administration's case and get your response to it, which is that the numbers have gone up. Unquestionably. There are more people coming to the border. The causes for that are a little unclear. They say, look, we're overwhelmed. We don't have the systems in place to deal with all this, and you do-gooding liberals are wringing your hands, but this is what we got to do.
Yeah, well, one of the things is the numbers are not historically high. But the other thing that's going on is all the resources are focused on law enforcement and putting people in jail rather than allocating resources to process asylum claims and hold hearings. And so if the resources were allocated differently, and so one of the things is the administration says, well, these are all families. Well, what that should say is they're not dangerous. They're just sitting down when they cross the border, say, I need asylum. So they don't need as many agents out there doing law enforcement. What they need are people to process the asylum claims.
Now, the administration of Barack Obama in 2014 started something called family detention in 2014 when it saw a similar surge at the border. It was criticized, I should say, by immigration lawyers and civil rights advocates.
And we criticized it.
And you criticized it. And ultimately, and people then were talking about its uncomfortable relationship to a camp situation. Back in 2014, it was basically ruled in violation of a consent decree called Flores, right? What is it? Is this administration doing family detention again?
You know, it's unclear. Right now, it looks like they're starting to do it, but what we're hearing is that they want to do it wholesale, and they want to get rid of the Flores consent decree. And what they basically want to do...
That's the only thing binding them from a full-scale build-out of a larger camp system.
That's right, and other constitutional rulings. But what we're hearing is that they want to do it. They want to put them all in detention centers, have them give up on their legitimate asylum claims, or process the claims so quickly that people don't get due process. And so we'll be in court, other groups will be in court to stop that, but we can't go back to a system of family detention. You know, the Obama administration did do it, but they ended it quickly, and by the end of the administration, they had figured out a way to ensure people's appearance at court hearings without detention. Right now, the conditions are so bad. I'm not one to make historical comparisons, so I'm going to leave that to others, but the conditions are horrendous. And not only that, but they are still separating children.
What do you think of what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said?
I'm going to leave that controversy to others. I'm the lawyer. I like to get the facts out. I'm going to let others make this. But we do need to focus on what is actually going on the ground, because this idea that the administration is only going after hardened criminals and that everyone's being treated fine is absolutely wrong.
Are the conditions acceptable or humane?
No, the conditions are not acceptable for either adults or children.
All right, Lee Gelernt, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.